West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I want to start with you, Madam Secretary. You've been so frank about the threats that you and your family have faced. And there was just something reminiscent. I mean, I know the January 6th Select Committee played the footage of the rioters outside of your home. I know you testified to being inside with your young child. One of the shootings in New Mexico involved a real bullet that went into the real bedroom of a real 10-year-old. What was this news like for you to process?
It was chilling, and it was all too familiar. And it really underscores how the status quo is unsustainable and unacceptable. We should not, and we need to stop being surprised when violent threats and this hateful rhetoric transcends into hateful actions. It has happened over and over and over again as a direct extension of the lies and the falsehoods that many intentionally and knowingly spread about our elections and our democracy. This is not who we are. It's not who we can continue to be. And we need folks on both sides of the aisle to say enough is enough.
Do you see that happening on both sides of the aisle? People saying enough is enough, Madam Secretary?
No, not to the extent we need it to, and not, despite the fact that voters spoke clearly last November and said enough is enough, rejecting candidates who spewed these lies and this hateful rhetoric. Still, we see so many trying to gain power and raise money and just gain attention by spreading this misinformation. So, we also need to see consequences. It's not enough to just expect people to change. So, for example, today we announced in Michigan we're going to try to pass legislation to increase the penalties for threatening, harassing, doxing election officials or election workers. And we really just need to take this seriously from a legal standpoint, as well as demand more and demand better from all of our leaders.
Frank Figluzzi, I just want to put some dots on the board and have you give us your analysis of how they're connected. January 6th, hundreds now, maybe we're up to 1,000 rioters prosecuted for their violent act and the abuse and physical abuse they carried out against law enforcement officials, a shooter in an FBI field office after the court-approved Mar-a-Lago search, the attack on Speaker Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, and now New Mexico.
All of them related, all of them linked, all of them instigated, and the logical outcome of 5 years or more of demonizing the other, of making it okay if you don't like what happened politically. If the election didn't come out your way, it's okay to storm the Capitol. It's okay to challenge until every judge in your state has said there's no challenge to be had. It's okay for Kari Lake in Arizona to still to this day claim that she won and it's rigged. And it's all been generated largely by one individual who really has to be the one to come out and say, I condemn this kind of violence. I don't stand for this anymore. And it's not going to happen. There's quite the opposite will happen here. He feeds on this. It strengthens him, and he continues to dupe people literally into losing their freedom or even their life at the hands of law enforcement because they're acting out violently because of some proverbial chip that's been implanted in their head that says violence is okay because those people over there are evil. They've been demonized. And that's what happened. If you as the police interrogate this individual in New Mexico, he's likely to swear up and down that it's all rigged. The system is rigged against him. And therefore it's justified to do what he did. But I'm going to get on my soapbox just real briefly here. And so I've given you the warning. Here it comes. This is domestic terrorism. What happened in New Mexico is domestic terrorism. And we still, Nicole, you know what I'm going to say, to this day don't have a federal domestic terrorism law. This guy is the poster child for why we need a federal domestic terrorism law. This is politically based violence. And for those who say, well, wait a minute, we've successfully gone after Oath Keepers leaders and charged Proud Boys leaders with seditious conspiracy, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is those laws don't match what happened in New Mexico. What this guy did was politically motivated terrorism, but it wasn't against the U.S. federal government. So this is the example of why we need a domestic terrorism statute.
Frank, you can stay on your soapbox for a second. You might need to be there to answer this question, maybe not. So the New Mexico mayor lists what this is, right? He says this is, quote, right-wing radical, election denial, and it has come to our community. Is it coming to every community? Is anyone immune?
There's no evidence that it's limited to any one particular state. We can go state after state, election after election, where people who lost claim it was rigged and then go after people. Fulton County, Georgia, look at what happened to the election workers there at their homes. Eric Swalwell, some guy's just been fired for threatening the life of Congressman Eric Swalwell because he doesn't like his politics. It's everywhere. Plot to kidnap the governor in Michigan because of her political decision making. No one is immune from this. And from a law enforcement perspective, it creates a real challenge because what essentially has to happen is local and state law enforcement have to monitor, and by the way, they're not equipped to do it, elections to see, okay, is this guy who lost, is he lost his mind? Are we getting, they have to almost provide defensive briefings to county and state election officials saying, look, if somebody comes to your home and complains about the rigged election, we need to know about that because we need to start monitoring the possibility of a violent threat. This changes the dynamic for local and state law enforcement.
And let me be clear, the victims aren't all Democratic officials. Let me just show you, Garrett. This is some of the footage created by the January 6th Select Committee in preparation for their public hearings. This is a mix of officials that span the ideological spectrum being targeted with political violence.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you?
Wishing death upon me, telling me that, I'll be in jail with my mother, and saying things like, be glad it's 2020 and not 1920.
When I saw the gun, I knew I had to get close. And at the same time, on some of these, we had a daughter who was gravely ill, who was upset by what was happening outside.
Garrett, it's not a whodunit. Donald Trump did it. Donald Trump did it, and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, by letting him cry it out after November, made all those people human targets for political violence. What's the response today?
Well, from the right, there's been basically none. I mean, look, I think you have to look at this from a slightly broader perspective. I mean, Trump has an immediate triggering effect on this. But if you look at the right-wing ecosystem when it comes to political violence, and generally there's much more challenging dynamic here at play. This combination of, apocalyptic rhetoric about stolen elections and the failure of democracy, the idea that it's not just any one election that's been, triggered by fraud, but that the very essence of democracy is being taken away from you, combined with this kind of Second Amendment absolutism and fetishization of guns. I'm looking at the warrant here for the arrest of Solomon Pena, and in one of the pictures, one of his accomplices, and you won't see this very well on TV, is sitting at a table with 7 or 8 guns kind of arrayed in front of him. The combination of that kind of political apocalyptic viewpoint and an attitude towards firearms that says we're going to have them, we're going to have a bunch, we're going to carry them with us everywhere we go, creates the environment where anybody, there are unstable people all across the political spectrum, but if you sort of subscribe, if you check those other 2 boxes, you create the environment in which this situation happens. And if you add someone like a Donald Trump to that, you do create a very dangerous and difficult situation. And to build on Frank's point, this is a case where Solomon Pena lost his election by 50 percentage points. If this was a rigging, it was a very, very effective rigging. There's no opportunity for law enforcement to say this is a case where we should watch out, that someone might be an election denier. This wasn't one that was close, that somebody might be worried about a ballot box being stuffed. I mean, this is not the kind of thing that would even be on that radar should local police departments have radar finally tuned enough to pick this up. I mean, Nicole, it is a pervasive problem. There were 9,000 recorded threats against members of Congress in 2021, the last complete year we have the numbers. That's more than 25 threats a day that are reported to the Capitol Police. Who knows how many more go beyond that? I mean, the scope of this problem is massive, and there's not a good handle on it from a law enforcement perspective or a political perspective right now.
It is Wednesday, the 18th of January of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Think not it is something untoward. It is just a lovely egg dish with a velvety hollandaise sauce. So hey, in a classic way too. Okay, well, we do have various levels of meaning here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy because that's what we're all about, aren't we? Indeed. Well, still getting back into the swing of things and got the new machinery, a little bit of a learning curve, indeed. I have never professed to be a computer whiz. Yeah, I took some language courses when they were first making them into language. Remember when you had to stuff those punch cards? I actually remember punching the cards. That was fun. I mean, put it into a machine, stacked them up, and then we got punched. Good thing, too, but yeah. So, learned BASIC and Fortran. I wouldn't say I learned it. I took some classes in it. So, I can kind of find my way around, but I really don't want to, especially when it gets into the innards of things. I am not going into the console, and I am not messing around with any directories, please. But, well, that said, we have new powerful machinery, and I have to say, I actually listened to it out in the world, and it seems to have, it just sounds better. And that seems to be the concurring opinion as we continue on with this powerhouse of resistance that we call Netroots Radio here. That West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is on. So welcome to you. All right. Well, it looks like we may be getting a little bit more weather today. Yeah, it's maybe half an inch, 3/4 of an inch, maybe even more. We'll see. It's supposed to drop pretty good today. But we're going to be getting cold nights and not as much precipitation in the days ahead, and we'll go over that when we get to the weather section at the chef's table. That's where we put it. Anyway, that's something to look forward to. I don't think we're going to have the sorts of winds that we had previously that bounce things around in the time that we were we turned the station into a robot station on the old Mac from 2008. Ouch. Legacy. That was a legacy machine. But it only had limited capabilities, so we kind of turned it into a robot station. And, we're friends with the PV channel, and they're friends with us. And so we turned it that way. And schedule is a little bit different, quite a bit different, but sometimes you get these shows that we have here over there. But stay here. Anyway, we had a little bit of wind damage in terms of the weather that had blown through here, literally. Mm-hmm. So that was a little bit fun, and I alluded to another flare-up of arthritis in my arthritic knees. The left one, that's where I tore the ACL a few years ago, many years ago. Yeah, I know, I'm supposed to get some knee replacements. I know, but let me just finish the story. So it just really ached, and I was on crutches for a bit to get around. In fact, the last doctor that I spoke with, because my primaries keep changing, I guess they're getting out of town. They're afraid of for their lives, probably. You're a doctor, you must be evil Satan. Yeah, I'm serious. That's what it's like around here sometimes. But anyway, said that I should be on crutches just to get around. But they are a benefit and also a liability, let's put it that way. So sometimes I'll just go without them until I need them, and I was on crutches, and it was not easy picking up blown giant umbrellas that were actually battened down, by the way. They weren't open. Big old garden swings, 4-person swings with awnings. Yow! Have a few of those, and a pretty big gazebo, not covered but with metal, but it should. But anyway, that is actually weighted down quite a bit. I took some time to weight down with big pails, pail buckets, and fill those up with sand and made them, not all the way, because that was the weight, and then made little planters out of them. And this is the first time that we've had it up for many, 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 many years, and it never got moved around like that. So I had to tiddlywink it back into place, because I'm only me, So that was a bit of fun. And there was all sorts of other things that happened out in the world while we were not speaking about it. And will we catch up? Nah. That's in the past now. The ramifications of it continue, and we will it'll catch up with us, as it always does. Well, that's enough of the rambling. Maybe I'll just let the news speak for itself. Yes. And why don't we? So what do we have in store for you here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy as we begin in this part of the salon called the Bistro Cafe? At the top, hateful rhetoric transcends into hateful actions. We see it happening right now, and I've been watching it happen for quite a while. A lot of hate out there, especially when you want to just love, peace, and understanding. What's so wrong with that? I don't know. Speaking of which, the Washington, D.C. mayor and the city council are at odds over the new criminal code. The FEC dismissed the GOP complaint against Gmail's spam filter. And the World Economic Forum in Davos said Elon Musk was not on the guest list for the annual meeting, despite what the head twit claims. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Nobel laureate Maria Ressa has been acquitted of tax charges in the Philippines. And the U.S. Supreme Court struggles with criminal charges against Turkish-owned bank Halkbank, accused of helping to launder billions of dollars so Iran could evade U.S. economic sanctions. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left across the page from that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And you know, there's a lot of coffee that gets consumed, right? So we consume a lot of coffee ourselves, but sometimes we like to use it as an excuse to encourage you to buy us a cup of coffee. And instead of doing that, actually buying us the coffee, you send the money to us, and that way we're able to pool it with other people who are buying us coffee. And then that puts a big dent in our bills, paying our bills. And I got to tell you, you know, this new machinery and the software, my God, does not come cheap, as they say. So your generosity has helped us continue getting new machinery to continue this powerhouse of resistance. Netroots Radio, indeed. So thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago, about almost a dozen years now. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. We're over there at Mastodon, at Netroots Radio, whatever is it dot? Maybe it's dot. MSTDN Plus. Okay. We'll get the actual address up on the show notes and links, and I'll get to that in just a moment too. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, in fact, I suggest you do. And the reason for that is because I just mentioned this. I post the show notes and links diary, and I'm going to tell you, it's the beginning of the year, so I have to do this. It will always be diaries. They will not be stories. Please, Marcos, diaries. Anyway, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. And you can get all the addresses they're linked up. So you can get our Mastodon site for Netroots Radio. I'll get on there soon. I got too much to do right now. But anyway, that show notes and links diary is where you can actually find the real reportage, the actual articles that we, riff off a little bit, don't we? If you would like to follow the show on on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West. Yes, that's the address for the show. And do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Ashraf Khalil. The Washington, D.C. mayor and city council are locked in a public dispute over how to respond to rising crime rates and spiraling public tensions over gun violence in the nation's capital. The D.C. Council voted 12-1 on yesterday, to override Mayor Muriel Bowser's veto of a sweeping rewrite of the city's criminal code. Bowser vetoed the measure earlier this month, saying she opposed some of its provisions, including a reduction in the maximum penalties for burglary, carjacking, robbery, and other offenses. Anytime there's a policy that reduces penalties, I think it sends the wrong message, she said. Bowser also expressed concern that a provision expanding defendants' rights to a jury trial for misdemeanor offenses would overwhelm the local court system. Council members who originally approved the rewrite by a unanimous vote expressed frustration with Bowser's stance, saying her objections were minor and could have been addressed earlier if her team had engaged more fully in the multi-year process of rewriting the criminal code. Ward 1 Council member Brianna Naidoo dismissed Bowser's veto as political theater. She implied that her intention was to project a public image as a law and order executive, since she knew her veto would be overridden. In 2022, There were 203 homicides in the district, about a 10% drop after years of steady increases. Homicides in D.C. had risen for 4 years straight, and the 2021 murder count of 227 was the highest since 2003. Crime and public safety dominated last year's mayoral campaign, which saw Bowser fending off a pair of council members to win a third term in office. Both of her challengers, Robert White and Trayon White, no relation, accused Bowser of mishandling public safety issues. Well, you know, a couple of white guys are going to do that, but I'm just saying this is their last name. Okay, please. Bowser is regarded by Black Lives Matter and other activist groups as a staunch defender of the Metropolitan Police Department, and she has sparred with the D.C. Council in the past over her push to hire more police officers. The new criminal code will take effect in October of 2025, but first, it must navigate one last obstacle. A newly Republican-controlled House of Representatives that many D.C. politicians fear is looking for a chance to interfere. All laws approved by the D.C. Council must pass a 60-day review period during which the House can alter or completely override them. Last year, several conservative Republicans expressed a desire for a more active hand in D.C. lawmaking if Republicans took control of the House in November's midterm elections. Stanley Becker of the Washington Post brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Federal Election Commission dismissed a complaint brought by Republican campaign groups arguing that Gmail spam filters disproportionately flagged GOP fundraising emails in a way that amounted to a prohibited in-kind contribution to Democrats. Oh, you weren't allowed to grift. I am so sorry. The available information indicates that Google's spam filter is in place for commercial rather than electoral purposes, the federal regulator wrote in a factual and legal analysis approved by at least 4 of the FEC's 6 members who are split evenly by party. Google's spam technology ignited a controversy last year as GOP groups blamed the technology for a dip in fundraising. They cited a study published by computer science researchers at North Carolina State University that claimed to have found that Gmail sent 77% of right-wing candidate emails to spam, compared with 10% of left-wing candidate emails. Google maintained that the study was flawed and said other factors, such as the frequency of emails and the ways users respond to them, inform the way its automated filters work. At a May meeting between Google's top lawyer and Republican lawmakers, Grassley offered an analogy. The 88-year-old suggested that Google sending emails to spam was the equivalent of the post office refusing to deliver the mail, according to 3 people in the room who spoke on condition that they not be named because if they were to share details from those closed-door meetings, they might be attacked physically by you-know-who. If you mail a letter, you expect it to be delivered, said a red-faced Grassley, as one person recalled. That should be what happens. The criticism was sparked by a drop-off in GOP fundraising. It declined by about 11% in the second quarter of 2022, compared with a first, according to federal filings from WinRed, the main donation processing portal for Republicans. While rejecting the GOP's critiques, Google also bowed to them, introducing a pilot program that allowed federal campaigns to exempt emails from spam detection. A Google spokesman declined to say how many campaigns signed up for the program. But the spokesman, Jose Castaneda, did welcome the FEC Jamie Keaton of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The World Economic Forum says billionaire Elon Musk was not on the guest list for the annual meeting of business executives, global leaders, and cultural trendsetters in Davos, Switzerland, despite what the Twitter owner claims. Notables from European Union chief Ursula von der Leyen to actor Idris Elba are gathering in the ritzy Alpine town this week to talk about global issues ranging from war to climate change and technology's effects on security. Musk was not there, though he says he was invited. Forum spokesman Jan Zopf knocked that down yesterday, Tuesday, saying the last time the Tesla CEO got an invitation was not this year and not recently. Last time it was in 2015. Musk said in a tweet on December 22nd, "My reason for declining the Davos invitation was not because I thought they were engaged in diabolical scheming, but because it sounded boring as fuck. LOL." He didn't specify when he got the invitation, but the tweet's timing suggested it was for this year. Musk did not immediately respond to requests from the AP for comment yesterday. Organizers did extend invitations to Musk as the boss of Tesla to join a few times in the 2010s, the last being in 2015, but he never registered or attended the annual meeting, Zopf said. The gathering has been criticized for a lack of concrete action that emerges after a series of sessions and speeches, while the forum itself has been the target of online conspiracy theories from those who believe the meeting involves a group of elites manipulating global events for their own benefit. Multi-billionaire Musk, one of the world's richest people, can certainly afford to attend Davos. Forum members pay between $130,000 to $921,000 for annual memberships, depending on the level of affiliation they want. Many executives trek to Davos to ride the coattails of the meeting and hobnob with corporate executives who flock into town, at times taking pot shots at the forum from the sidelines. For example, Richard Branson, the British tycoon behind Virgin, has reputedly come to town several times without attending the meeting itself. Well, I gotta confess, I've gone skiing in Davos, and I never attended, well, I saw some talks, but I never attended as a subscribed member, thankfully. All right, let us now get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Instant Icon. Imagine for a minute a cross-studio mashup of Chucky going up against a connected, state-of-the-art android with a titanium and composite body. Mysterious possession versus programming gone awry. The granddad of possessed movie dolls versus the new kid. It'd be neat. So now, from the horror factory Blumhouse and James Wan, who gave us 2014's Annabelle, we have Megan, the Model 3 generative android created by Gemma, a designer for a toy company, who, thanks to a tragic car accident, becomes the guardian of 10-year-old Katie. Totally unprepared for such duty, Gemma deploys the Megan project that she'd been ordered to sideline by her tech bro boss to tend to Katie. The project had been intended as a learning-capable companion for kids, so why not kill two birds? Well, the rest of the movie is basically the answer to the question, what could possibly go wrong? Among those who learn the answer are the Karen and her mean dog next door, a bully who goes after Katie on a playground, the toy company, which had become reinterested in Megan after seeing her, or it, in action with Katie, and then eventually Gemma. The doll and how it's made up and dressed and how it dances are pitch-perfect absurdum as brought off by 12-year-old New Zealand dancer Amy MacDonald, the voice of Jenna Davis, and no CGI. So are the send-ups of electronic babysitting, tech culture, and indeed the culture at large, as Megan, often non-contextually, imports her knowledge of the world. There are enough jump tricks and violence to keep Megan rooted in the horror genre, but it's largely camp comedy for a PG-13 audience, and it works. While we may never see Chucky and Megan on screen together, this one's real sequel's already been greenlit. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Emily Schwing. In September, a massive storm on Alaska's west coast brought a surge of water 17 miles inland from the Bering Sea to the Chupik village of Chivak.
The storm was crazy.
What was crazy about it?
It flooded down there. It was like a sea, but
it was like an ocean.
Some powers turned out, and some people had to sleep at the school for 3 days.
Just over 900 people live in this community. It sits on a high bank above the Ninglakfuk River. Elder John Pengayak says the storm shook his resolve.
For 3 days I was in turmoil because I finally realized how dangerous our situation here in western Alaska is vulnerable from very high winds and water surge.
The impact of the storm, called Merbok, is very real for thousands of rural residents in western Alaska. Dozens of villages saw some level of flooding. People lost power, causing chest freezers to defrost. The power outages destroyed months of subsistence food that people spent their summers storing up. Food security in this part of the state is precarious, and on top of defrosted freezers, nearly all of the 90 or so boats people use to go fishing and hunting for their main sources of food in Chivak were damaged or destroyed. Pengayak says the losses are devastating.
It's our survival.
Yeah.
If I'm a Chupik, subsistence is mine. That's me. That's subsistence is me. Because I'm the one that's going out and fishing. I'm the one that's going out and hunting for my family. And we do it for livelihood and survival.
When the flood came in, it filled up with water, and then it drifted over and sunk right on the river channel.
Clinton Slats was in Chivak's community hall days after the storm to report his losses to 2 employees who the village's tribal council had hired to take reports on the damage. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to retrieve his boat from the bottom of the Ninglakfok River.
Hard to put into words how it impacts. It's just, I have no way to go hunt and gather with the remainder of the season by boat.
The storm didn't just destroy boats and motors. Nearly a dozen fishing sheds that held all sorts of gear, from rifles to nets to gas cans and rain gear, were destroyed. Some had completely disappeared from the riverbank. Elsewhere across Alaska, summer fish camps and hunting cabins were destroyed. And because the storm arrived in Alaska before the ground was frozen, coastal erosion was extreme.
And so, of course, it's much easier to erode material that doesn't even have any ice in there to help stabilize it even a little, as compared to the same storm, say, now, where things have started to freeze up.
That's Rick Toman, a climate specialist at the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy at the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
But the warming oceans contribute to that longer period of time before freeze-up gets going. And that, again, is something that is sure to continue into the future.
He says conditions this year in the South Pacific were ripe for the development of a storm like Merbok.
Historically, the waters in that part of the subtropical Pacific are just not warm enough to support typhoon development. But this year, the much of the subtropical Pacific east of Japan is far warmer than normal. Some areas the warmest on record.
This storm was rare. Alaska hasn't seen anything like it in 50 years. Dozens of rural communities saw infrastructure damage in addition to flooding. Many scientists, including Toman, believe the storm, which originated as a typhoon in the northwestern Pacific, is a harbinger of what climate change could bring to the northernmost U.S. state in coming years.
Certainly we know a big contributor to the increased impacts isn't that there are more storms, but rather storms are coming when there's no sea ice.
As the coldest months of winter bear down on Alaska, there's still currently no significant shore-fast sea ice along Alaska's Bering Sea coast or further north along the shoreline of the southern Chukchi Sea, other than around the mouths of rivers. It's a phenomenon that's become the norm in recent years.
In the 20th century, there would have been sea ice to offer protection or act as a buffer or a wave break. And with that gone, the impacts have increased.
After Merbok developed as a powerful typhoon, it made its way north and east toward Alaska. As it did so, it grew into something meteorologists really don't even have a word for. Some people called it the remnants of a typhoon. Toman referred to it as an ex-typhoon. But that kind of language doesn't do justice to describe its power or immensity. By the time it slammed into Alaska, it had tripled in size alone.
Over the long term, there's not any good hard evidence that the intensity of these storms is increasing, but the background that they're working in, a warmer environment, a less frozen environment, is really, I think, the driver of the impacts.
Residents in dozens of western Alaskan communities continue to repair damaged homes and outbuildings and to apply for disaster assistance through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the state government, and other organizations. What Merbok laid bare is their vulnerability and the extreme need for improved and strengthened infrastructure as such storms become the new normal in the region. For 60 Second Science, I'm Emily Schwing.
Wouldn't it be great if life came with a remote control? You know, you could hit pause when you needed to, or hit rewind, like that time you knocked down that wasp's nest.
Uh-oh.
Or that time you forgot to roll up your windows in the car wash.
Fantastic.
Yeah, a remote control would have come in handy then. Well, life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome, but prediabetes does. With early diagnosis and a few healthy changes like managing your weight, getting active, stopping smoking, and eating healthier, you can stop prediabetes before it leads to type 2 diabetes. It's easy to learn your risk. Take the 1-minute test today at doihaveprediabetes.org. Life doesn't come with a remote control.
Yikes!
So you're on your own with the wasps. You have the power to take control of prediabetes. Visit doihaveprediabetes.org today. That's doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Arthritis is common among veterans. Traumatic and overuse injuries during active duty are risk factors for developing arthritis. Fortunately, there are low-cost or no-cost strategies that can help veterans manage arthritis. Physical activity can reduce pain and improve function. It can also help improve mood and play a role in managing other chronic conditions, such as heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. You can do low-impact activities, such as walking, biking, swimming, and water aerobics, all good forms of exercise. Arthritis-specific classes can help you get started. Information on classes, exercise programs, and tools are available at cdc.gov/arthritis. These resources can help reduce pain and improve function. Learning self-management techniques can help all veterans become more active, improve their overall quality of life, and thrive.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
In 2023, can abortion still be considered a constitutional right? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. As you know, the Supreme Court in 2022 in Dobbs overruled Roe v. Wade and erased reproductive choice as a federal constitutional right. But the United States Constitution is not the only constitution that matters. Every state has a constitution, and state constitutional rights can be broader than the federal, as was demonstrated in early January 2023 when the Supreme Court of South Carolina, 3-2, ruled that the state constitutional guarantee of a right to privacy includes a woman's right to choose. That decision struck down a state law that prohibited abortion after generally 6 weeks. Sadly, at the same time, the Idaho Supreme Court, also 3-2, ruled that under that state's constitution, abortion is not a fundamental right. The Idaho court upheld a state law that bans practically all abortions. One difference, South Carolina's constitution has a specific right to privacy. Idaho's doesn't. While the South Carolina decision shows that states can protect fundamental rights even when the Supreme Court won't, the Idaho decision demonstrates that state court decisions can come out very differently, and that fundamental rights or not can depend on the state in which you live. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Have you ever worn a union button or T-shirt to work? On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. Members of the Australian Tramways Association in Brisbane, Queensland, decided to put on their union badges at work. The men operated and maintained the city's public transport system. For months before the action, their manager, an American named Joseph Stillman Badger, had banned wearing the badges. He wanted to thwart the union from growing in numbers. Before noon that day, the workers gathered together and donned their union badges by affixing them to their watch chains. And for that, they were promptly suspended from their jobs. They were told they could return to work if they took off the badges. The workers refused. That night, 10,000 people gathered in the city's market square in a rally to support the workers. The next day, 25,000 workers walked off the job and marched through the streets. A general strike was called for January 30th. 43 unions supported the strike. The police violently attempted to disband the strikers on February 2nd, a day known in Australia as Black Friday. Perhaps the most remembered event in the strike occurred when the famous feminist Emma Miller stuck her hat pin into the rump of the police chief's horse. The horse reared and sent him tumbling to the ground. The strike wore on for 5 weeks before it faded. At the end of February, the tramway employees were officially granted the right to wear their badges, but the company refused to hire back striking workers. The events at Brisbane were an important stand for free speech and the right to form a union. A question for today is, how far would you be willing to go to show your union pride? Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 38 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only about 42, mostly cloudy with periods of heavy rain. And winds will be light and variable. Rainfall will be about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, or maybe even more. Cloudy tonight, lows about 33, winds light and variable. And then cloudy early tomorrow with partial sunshine expected late. High in the mid-40s, and winds will be light and variable. And the 10-day forecast looks like we're going to have some pretty chilly nights in the 20s. Pollen is rated as none here in the town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is in the good range at 25 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.01 inches, visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's called the Weather Underground. London is 40 degrees and sunny. Paris is 40 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 49 and cloudy. Kabul is 28 and cloudy. Hong Kong is 54 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 45 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 44 and partly cloudy. And New York is 51 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Jesset Anano of the Washington Post brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Embattled Philippine journalist and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa was acquitted of tax evasion charges today, Wednesday, in a decision welcomed by rights activists who have expressed concern over worsening press freedoms in the Southeast Asian country. The Philippine Court of Tax Appeals cleared Ressa, age 59, and her social media site
social news site Rappler of 4 charges of tax evasion that had been filed by the administration of President Duterte, who was in power from 2016 to 2022. Ressa could have faced a maximum of 34 years in prison if she had been convicted. The government launched its legal action in 2018, accusing Rappler of failing to declare investments from foreign investors such as Omidyar Network, a fund created by eBay founder and philanthropist Pierre Omidyar. Ressa, on behalf of Rappler, took to the witness stand to deny those charges, arguing that the transactions in question were not a form of taxable income. While in office, Duterte frequently targeted Rappler for its critical coverage of his administration, which included reporting on his extrajudicial war on drugs that left thousands dead, many of whom were poor Filipinos. Rappler documented the execution-style killings of many drug suspects and criticized the authoritarian leader's human rights record, prompting Duterte to ban his reporters from covering his office. Apart from the tax allegations, Duterte's government filed 3 other cases against Ressa and Rappler, which are pending in Philippine courts. She is on bail as she appeals her 2020 conviction of cyber libel. Rights groups have called for that conviction to be quashed.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Robert Barnes of the Washington Post brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Supreme Court faced weighty and seemingly novel questions yesterday, Tuesday, as it considered whether the federal government can pursue criminal charges against Turkey's state-owned bank, which is accused of helping to launder billions of dollars so Iran could evade U.S. economic sanctions. A lawyer for Turkey's Halkbank told the justices that sovereign immunity shields the institution from criminal prosecution under centuries-old precedents. But 2 lower federal courts have said the prosecution may proceed and that there is no federal law against the case being pursued by a U.S. attorney in New York. The initial charges against Halkbank were brought during the Trump administration and threatened to close the relationship or threaten the close relationship between Trump and Erdogan. Prosecutors allege that from 2012 to 2016, Halkbank and its senior officers used front companies in Iran, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates and made illicit transactions that should have exposed the bank to sanctions under U.S. law. The front companies allowed the bank to transfer about $20 billion of what should have been restricted Iranian funds, according to the indictment, including at least $1 billion that passed through the U.S. financial system. At least one official has pleaded guilty to the scheme. Halkbank has resisted the indictment. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.